Welcome to Stuff You Should Know, a production of iHeartRadio.
And welcome to the podcast. I'm Josh, and there's Chuck, and Jerry's hanging out here wearing a giant sombrero, and that makes this Stuff You Should Know.
I was actually going to sing that. That's funny that you thought of the same dang thing.
That's the one. That's the one that I grew up on.
Yeah, I think I told the story once before about when, it's funny how these things you remember from your childhood. Mm-hmm. When I was in kindergarten, they taught us the Mexican hat dance. Yeah. And we danced around, not hats, but spray can lids.
Like
spray paint lids.
Why?
Because, we didn't have little sombreros.
Okay.
And it's one of those things where looking back, like, God bless them, they were teaching us about another culture, mm-hmm. which is great for a 5-year-old. But like looking back, all these, white suburban Atlantan kids dancing around spray paint can lids is a little cringe.
It's a weird, added detail, but I'll bet it was still adorable to see,
It's an odd substitute. Like, we didn't decorate them. I would get that. They were just little lids.
Right. No brims or anything like that. So it's more of like a fez dance.
Yeah, sure. It was like a fez dance, minus the tassel.
So, Chuck, I just want to say, if this pick is from your recent trip to the Yucatan, that is the vacation that just keeps giving.
No, it's not at all. We heard no mariachi down there.
No.
I don't know why I thought of this. I'm not sure, other than the fact that it's a music that I like, mm-hmm. and it's a fun, when people are over and it's a Friday night, we're happy houring up some cocktails. Mm-hmm. Putting on a mariachi mix is always a good move.
Sure.
And, when I lived in L.A., I lived in a Mexican neighborhood, in a largely Mexican neighborhood, in a 100% Mexican or Mexican-American apartment complex. I was the only gringo there.
Oh, wow.
And so the music was just blaring out at all times, and I really got tired of it for a while, mm-hmm. but it was in getting tired of it that I got an appreciation for it and ending up loving it, if that makes sense.
That's really cool. Yeah, it does make sense, actually. You subsumed it.
By attrition, I guess, yeah.
Yeah, sure. So, yeah, this was your pick. I don't know that I ever would have gotten around to this one because I'm not, a huge mariachi fan. I've got nothing against it, but, my exposure to mariachi is sadly, Speedy Gonzalez cartoons and, Mexican restaurant visits. But now that I've researched it some, I have kind of developed more of an appreciation of it than I had before. But one of the things that struck me about it, Chuck, is that if you listen to, old mariachi, mm-hmm. and, relatively new mariachi, mm-hmm. there's something about, there's a through line where it's very clearly the same kind of music after decades and decades, centuries, really, you could say. And I think that's really cool that it's not like I went to look for disco mariachi.
Of course you did.
And yeah, it doesn't exist. I found a mariachi band doing covers of some disco favorites, but it was still mostly disco with a little bit more horn than normal. But it's a really I don't want to say unchanged because it's definitely evolved and other kinds have merged with other kinds, but it's you can recognize it from 1900 to 1990 as mariachi music.
Yeah, and I think one of the through lines that I saw, and this is something we talked a little bit about before we recorded, was, and I think the name of this episode I've already titled the Rodney Dangerfield of musical genres, but it's a genre that I think is always worked at gaining respect globally, mm-hmm. and among the intelligentsia and the classical community, and I think part of that is rooted in some just inherent racism that America feels toward Mexico, which I think is just something that's just there. It's a country that is our closest neighbor, obviously Canada as well, but it's an interesting place in that 50% of the country, I think, since the pandemic lives below the poverty line, but it's also a top 10 country economically globally, which was hard to believe. So Mexico, I think, has a lot of people living in poverty and a lot of very wealthy people. So a big wealth gap there. And this music is a part of their proud tradition. And I think little things have happened over the years, and we'll talk about a lot of them that have helped kind of up the respect ante, where it's not just Mexican restaurant music to people here and around the world. And I think like movies like Coco coming along, like just little things like that have happened over the years that really help kind of bring it to the fore where people realize what a kind of cool music it is.
Yeah, for sure. And yeah, that's just because, people's exposure to it is strictly in Mexican restaurants doesn't mean like that's where it exists. Like it's moved into concert halls. It's moved into like schools and colleges. Like it's definitely gained a lot of respect. But I think what you're saying is correct, largely, that there is a certain sense of, if not racism, at least xenophobia or a sense of foreignness that probably prevents like the average waspy American from getting really deep into mariachi. But I think also in this stands for Mexico too, that it's a classist thing too, because mariachi music is rooted in the rural areas. It's a proud rural worker tradition. It's like super egalitarian in that sense. And, people of, certain classes, they don't like that kind of stuff. They find it lowbrow or it doesn't appeal to them or whatever. And so I think that even as mariachi has evolved over the decades, that same old kind of grudge or view that's become outdated over time to a large extent still remains among some people.
Agreed. This is one of our best intros yet.
All right. So let's go back to the beginning. Where'd mariachi come from?
Well, and by the way, I've really worked on a lot of these pronunciations. I'm going to do my best, but as always, we try.
We're going to try, but yeah, there's a lot of pronunciation challenges up in this one.
All up in here? Mm-hmm. So we got to go back to colonial Mexico, and the original form of the music came, and this is pretty obvious, is obviously some Spanish influence, but something that may surprise folks is that also enslaved Africans that the Spanish brought to the colonies, a lot of the rhythmic traditions of that music is present in the origins of mariachi as well. Yeah, and
a lot of people say, plus there was indigenous music at the time, so those things all just kind of blended and gelled together, which is pretty appropriate for mariachi, as we'll see over the decades. Like they've not hesitated to be like, oh, I really like that sound, or I didn't think of using that instrument and incorporating it to make a new sound.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. You got to go to Western Mexico, to Jalisco, where we talk about a musical form called son Jalisciense. I know I got that one right because I practiced it over and over.
Me too.
And
I want to take a crack. I don't want to have
go ahead.
Practice for nothing. Jalisciense.
Yeah, very nice.
Okay, thanks.
I think we should each pronounce everything.
Okay.
And then Jerry can just blend them together. Add a little guitarrón on top of it.
Yeah.
And we're all set. Right. So that music was happening in Jalisco and Western Mexico, but it was, similar kinds of music were happening in other places in Mexico. Mm-hmm. And like you said, these were farm workers. They would play for special occasions. They would, it's interesting, in the early mariachi, did not have horns, which is almost hard to believe because horns are so vital to it now. But violins, guitar, and harp were sort of the first mariachi instruments. Yeah,
mostly string ensembles, right? And they were songs performed by the peasant class working on haciendas. And at the time, before the Mexican Revolution, that ran roughly from 1910 to 1920, there was a feudal system, essentially, that was the hacienda. And the people who worked on those haciendas were very much exploited. But one of the jobs you could have is a mariachi performer. I got the impression, like, if you were a mariachi performer, that was your job. You didn't necessarily work in the fields or do anything else. That was the role you played on the hacienda. And the thing is, that kind of inequality is just unsustainable. It doesn't matter what century you live in. It doesn't matter what country you live in. Eventually, as one group is just so thoroughly exploited by another group, the exploited group's going to revolt. And that was the basis of the Mexican Revolution. That it was a class revolution where the workers rebelled and said, no more, you're not going to exploit us anymore.
Right. And as you'll see, they wrote a lot of music about this stuff.
Right.
In the form of the mariachi songs. But Cocula, which is in Jalisco outside of Guadalajara, is where some people say it started, even though you can't draw like written history there. If you want to look at the word in print, which is something we always seem to talk about first time we see things written down, it is a letter from a Catholic priest in 1852 that was denouncing it, basically saying, you know, these big drunken festivals and this music that you're doing is a problem. Please cut it out.
Right. Signed, local crank priest.
Exactly.
So that was, like you said, the first time in print, right? And I think before that it was a local place name. But really mariachi, as we understand it, the word, the etymology, I guess, has long been kind of disputed. And here's the little fun fact I had no idea about. The French, as in France, occupied Mexico from 1862 to 1866. Did you know that?
Sure.
You knew that?
I did. I think I've seen that in movies.
I had no idea.
The only reason I would know anything.
So during that 4-year occupation of Mexico by the French, apparently local musicians would be hired to perform at weddings. So there was a long-standing myth that the word mariachi was a kind of a local butchering of the French word mariage.
Yeah, not true.
No, that's not it. Actually, the answer's a lot cooler, I think.
Well, they still don't know for sure. I mean, my money is on the tree. Is that what you were talking about?
Yeah. What else could it possibly be?
I don't know, because there's a tree. It's separated out differently, but it is the word mariachi. It's just mariachi.
That sounded Italian.
That sounded totally Italian.
That's a spicy mariachi.
I probably put the stress on the wrong thing, but that was a tree that legend has it, or people say at least, was the wood that they made the instruments out of. And that, I don't know, that seems pretty convincing to me.
For sure. It was an indigenous Cora word too, so hats off to them as well. There's one more that I'm like, I don't know about this one, but they're like, no, the chi is from the Cora language, but the Maria refers to the Virgin Mary, and that these were religious songs at first. I didn't see anything about these being particularly religious at any point in time, did you?
Not really. I mean, I'm sure there are religious mariachi songs, but most of the stuff I've seen is about like working on the farm or these love ballads and stuff like that.
Yeah, or just getting, crunk.
Getting down.
Yeah. So, like I said, the hacienda system, I don't believe it actually ended, but I think it was very much disrupted during and right after the revolution. And as a result, there was, a lot of people who were displaced as workers, including mariachi musicians who no longer had like a regular gig on the local hacienda. And so whenever there's a disruption in the countryside, those people tend to make it toward city centers to see if there's work or other ways to support themselves. So there's a big influx of people to Mexico City around the 19-teens and 20s. And a lot of them were mariachi musicians, and they brought their different traditions with them because depending on what state you're talking about, each state has its own kind of musical mariachi tradition. And
sure.
in that era in Mexico City is when they first started to really kind of blend together.
Yeah, I love this kind of thing where whether it's food or musical styles, when different people of different cultures all of a sudden are living among each other and start sharing opinions and ideas. That's just, I don't know. I think the best stuff in history is created that way.
Right.
And that's what happened there. And they brought their musics together. This is when band sizes grew. It was not necessarily like a quartet like it had been. All of a sudden you could see mariachi in the, like 12 people playing in a band. This, and big time game changer. This is when horns came into the mix. And, basically this was 19 teens, you said?
Yeah. 10 and 20s maybe.
Yeah, mariachi would never be the same after the introduction of those trumpets.
No, for sure. And apparently, in pretty short order, they figured out how to do, more than one trumpet, as we'll see. There's actually one band that was responsible for that. But one of the other things they started doing, too, was wearing charros, those cowboy outfits, the very, slick cowboy outfits with, the short waistcoat and the tight pants and the ankle-length boots and a wide bow tie and a big sombrero. That emerged from this era as well, too, where all of a sudden these guys were in the big city wearing peasant garb with straw hats, just as probably a little gauche all of a sudden, and they were making pretty good money. So you could outfit a dozen mariachi musicians in matching outfits. And, probably attract even more money because people would want to hire you because you had that kind of thing going on. And it became a tradition pretty quick.
Can I admit something?
Yeah.
If it were not for being accused of cultural appropriation, I would wear charro clothing at every fancy event I ever went to.
So
I think it's so cool looking. I love it. And I think I might just have to settle for a nudie suit. You know what those are?
No, a birthday suit, you mean?
No, you probably do. There was a tailor, and he was a lot of things. In fact, he might make an interesting episode one day named Nudie Cone.
Oh, okay.
And he made these suits that like Graham Parsons wore and rhinestone cowboy type stuff with
cool.
roses embroidered on the suits and all that stuff. So nudie suits became really popular with the earliest alt country scene and rodeos and stuff. So I think I could get away with a nudie suit.
Okay, but why? You're not part of the cowboy culture. You're appropriating that. Why is it any different? Why couldn't you just wear a charro suit? I think that if you think something is deeply cool and you're wearing it out of respect and because you think it's super cool, not because for whatever reason, if you're just positively wearing something, I don't see how somebody could legitimately accuse you of cultural appropriation. And if they did, I think they'd be wrong.
No, I'm with you. It would be from fear of being accused of that more than anything.
Just being accused.
I think because people would probably think Tom Hanks showing up in Big in that thing, they would think I was being funny or making a joke where I'm like, no, I actually think I look really cool because this is a really cool suit and the tailors that make this stuff are amazing and I would love to show it off.
So the difference would be you would show up and just not say anything about your charro suit.
I don't know.
That would be the way to do it.
Okay.
Because you're not trying to be like, hey, get a load of this get up. You're just like, this is what I'm wearing. If I were wearing a regular suit, I wouldn't say anything about that.
So I definitely shouldn't have a squirting flower in my lapel.
No. Or a spray paint can cap that you do a little hat dance around.
Yeah. Or it would have a little elastic cord that hangs be like a little tiny bellhop hat.
Totally.
No. Anyway, I just think those are super cool, and I think nudie suits would be maybe just short stuff.
Okay. I'm glad you explained nudie because I didn't catch that funny. T the first time.
No, there's not a T. It's Nudie.
Oh, okay. So, yeah, that's exactly what I thought.
That was the guy's name.
Hey, you want to take a break and come back? Because we're 18 minutes into this great one.
Hey, let's do it.
Okay. We'll be right back, everybody. So one more thing, Chuck, about this kind of diaspora toward Mexico City. There was a change in how they performed too. They started performing in public places, in bars and plazas, and they also started to be more mobile. They would move around. In part because they were busking, basically. So if there was somebody that looked like they might be a paying customer, they might follow them around for a little bit and see if they could get them to pay for a song or request a song or something like that. So that mobility, the charro suits, and the expansion and rearrangement of instruments, including the horns, those were all big things that happened in the 20s.
Yeah, and I think that tradition, when you see a small mariachi quartet moving around a Mexican restaurant, it's sort of rooted in that tradition. And I think that's another reason I didn't have an appreciation now that I remember back is whenever that happened, when I was at dinner with my family and I was a kid, I could just see the air leave my dad's body and just he hated it so much. He hated any attention at all being like pointed publicly his way. Like at Disney World, if they were like, let me pick somebody from the audience. If they ever looked at my dad, he would just shake his head.
I can totally identify with that.
Not smile or anything. Whereas I could not be more different. I'm like raising my hand, wanting to jump up and volunteer for whatever. And I love it when the mariachi comes by the table, even though Atlanta doesn't have nearly enough of that. No. And I think just word of advice, if you feel awkward and you don't know, like, do I eat or not? You just keep eating and like smile at them and just enjoy the whole thing. I don't think it means, hey, stop what you're doing and only look at us. It's a part of the lively atmosphere of enjoying the food.
But you can also, if you're in your dad's mindset, order a double margarita stat.
Yeah, he didn't drink though.
Oh, well, yeah, I'll bet he was super uncomfortable.
He really didn't know how to do life.
The stew and the discomfort.
So we're talking 1950s about this time, and this is when we had a couple of trumpets come on the scene. And again, we'll talk about the two gentlemen who worked out how to do that. You had a few violins usually, and then you had two really key instruments that are basically ubiquitous in any mariachi. One is the vihuela, which you might call a guitar, but it's a little different. It's smaller. It's got 5 strings. It's higher pitched, so the G, D, and A strings are all tuned an octave higher. So it sounds a little different, but it's got those nylon strings.
Don't you also pick it?
Yeah. Well, I mean, you strum it with your fingers as well, but finger picking and strumming. Okay. And then you've got the heart of the band, and the most important instrument is that guitarrón that I talked about, and that's that. It sort of looks like a stand-up bass with a super, super short neck that you are playing. It's really, really big-bodied. And this thing, though, is not plucked like a standard bass. It also has 5 strings, although there are some 5-string basses, but traditionally you think of a 4-string bass. But it's not plucked. You're playing octaves on the strings with a guitarón. Yeah,
and you're playing it like a guitar, so it looks like a hilarious, oversized novelty guitar until you hear it, and then you're like, oh, okay, that's pretty awesome.
Yeah, but that's the whole rhythm section, because one thing you will never hear someone say is, did you get a load of that drummer in the mariachi band?
Right, yeah, it's true. Yeah, because
no drums.
That huge, deep, hollow body like produces all of the sound you need from that.
Yeah, it's pretty great, and it's really a key.
Some other things, though, you might overhear people saying at a mariachi show is, wow, wasn't that accordion player amazing? Or the French horn dude, or the flautist even. Because they like wind instruments and they like accordions. And one of the things that they'll play, as we'll see, are things like waltzes, polkas. And that was because of the influence of German immigrants to northern Mexico and southern Texas in the 19th century, that music influenced mariachi as well.
That's right. One of the big respect boxes was ticked in 2011 when UNESCO came forward and said, mariachi, the string music, the song and the trumpet, is now officially added to what is called the representative list of the intangible cultural heritage of humanity, which is a great sounding list. I love the whole intangible aspect.
For sure. I went to a place in Kyoto that was like a bamboo forest, and UNESCO added the sound of wind moving through that bamboo forest to that same list. So it just kind of gives
UNESCO at some point.
We should. At the very least, we should do this list. We could just read it off and be like, that one's awesome too. Here's another awesome one.
Yeah, I love it.
Okay. So, yeah, that's a huge deal. I mean, and that was 2011. So mariachi, it's like, this is never going anywhere. And it wasn't going to anyway. There was a guy who ran Jalisco's Ministry of Culture. His name was Alejandro Cravioto. And he said at the time that there's no Mexican musical expression more widespread throughout the world. And he also said that it's so much a part of Mexican people's lives that they hear it, it's played from their baptism to their burial. And it's absolutely true. They play baptisms, they play funerals, and they play everything in between too.
Yeah, but it's interesting, when that happened, there was a musician and a TV host named Cornelio Garcia. You like that? That said, when this happened, they said, mariachi still isn't getting the respect among academics here in our own country. And you'll see that's one of the sort of recurring themes over and over, is within Mexico itself, it's gained more acceptance in the U.S. than it has in some parts of Mexico among higher classes.
Yeah, and I think that's that kind of classist grudge that I was referring to is still around, Because again, it's the music of the revolution, and the revolution was the revolution of the peasants, and it's really prideful, patriotic music, in a lot of ways too. And it's the music of Mexico. There's a mariachi song called El Son de la Negra, and it's considered Mexico's second national anthem.
Yeah.
So it's just so woven into the fabric that, it's pretty tough. Like if you live in Mexico, if you're born and raised Mexican intellectual and you don't like mariachi, I'm sure you just have a miserable life down there.
You're the Mexican version of my dad.
Yeah.
So you mentioned the different musical sounds incorporating things like waltz and polka. Fandango is also another, like these African rhythms that we were talking about. Mm-hmm. And they have, obviously the ballads and the waltzes and things like that, but some other sort of song styles. One of them is called a ranchera, and these were very much songs of the Mexican Revolution. These are the ones that are really the patriotic songs of the peasant class, talking about how great, and that's what's so cool about it too, is like these songs weren't talking about, maybe some did, but it seems like they were never talking about oppression. They were celebrating the farm and celebrating ranch life and stuff like that.
Right, exactly. Yeah, and romanticizing it, you could even say. There's a very famous song called Volver, Volver, I think is maybe how you'd say it.
Sure. I didn't practice that one.
It was very famously performed by a guy named Vicente Fernandez, known as El Rey de la Música Ranchera. And this guy is my speed. Like he looks like a total tough guy from the 70s, but he also looks like he probably smells really good.
Yeah. And
he's like singing this like wan, plaintive love song where his heart's clearly broken in a Mexican restaurant with a horse in there with him. And he plays his song on the jukebox and starts singing it. And it's really awesome. So I really kind of like Vicente Fernandez as of yesterday.
Yeah, that's a good song. I remember hearing a lot of ballads when I lived in Yuma. My sort of best friend for that year was this guy named Mark. And this was like a big cultural shift for me to all of a sudden my best friend was this Mexican guy. Mm-hmm. And I hung out at his house a lot and just got kind of thrown into like the real deal culture as opposed to the kid dancing around the spray paint lid. And it was just, they were all so sweet and so nice. And Mark's dad, like I remember seeing this picture on the fridge of Mark's dad in the 70s. And he was like, he had these sideburn chops and was riding a chopper motorcycle and was wearing like a beaded vest. And I was like, do you have any idea how much cooler your dad is than mine? And I was like, your dad is just like the coolest looking dude I've ever seen. And I remember like his mom would play these great Mexican mariachi ballads. And I like the ballads. Okay. I really like the upbeat stuff a lot more, but it's kind of fun. It's like these ballads are so like sort of slow and languid and syrupy, and they just feel very sincere.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. Like in some places, gut wrenching. In last June, a bunch of mariachi, I think something like 50 of them, showed up at Uvalde.
Oh yeah,
to basically sing and just to mourn with everybody there. And there's plenty of videos on it. And if you want to just have your guts wrenched, like go watch that. It's just really amazing how just applicable this music is to all these different like events or occasions.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
That song you were singing, by the way, you kind of Lou Reed sang it with the I. That is a very famous ranchera, and that song is Cielito Lindo.
Uh-huh. That's the one that everyone has heard.
Everyone has heard either that or La Cucaracha, which is not a ranchera. That is called a corrido. Yeah,
so I'm not 100% certain that there's a clear dividing line between rancheras and corridos, because that Volver Volver song it tells a story. So that's one of the defining characteristics of a corrido. It's a ballad. And it's not necessarily just about like love lost or even love gained. They can be about crime. It can be about heroism. And I saw on a site called Remezcla that's usually paired with like a moral lesson of some sort. So it's like a ballad, basically, is the best way to put it, as we already did.
Yeah, and you know what? This is a great time to mention that I was wrong. We had our sort of ballad disagreement a while back when I said that ballads were love songs. And we had a lot of people write in that were like, no. Like your own Billy Joel, Chuck, sang the Ballad of Billy the Kid. And the Ballad of Curtis Lowe by Leonard Skinner. They're just story songs, but I think I just was thinking more love ballads, and that's a subgenre.
Sure, yeah.
So correction made.
So wait a minute, were they saying Josh was right?
Oh, yeah, you were way right.
How did I miss this bunch of emails then?
I forgot to frame them and send them to you. Like,
yeah, but I have like a filter set on my Outlook. Anytime it says the phrase "Josh is right" or any variation of it, goes right to the top of my inbox.
You have searches out for the words correct.
Yeah. Sometimes I hit up people who've already sent in listener mail just to kind of goad them into sending those kind of emails.
And then the final little style that we'll cover is one we mentioned at the beginning, the son a la silencia, and that is the original folk style.
Yeah, that's the El Son de la Negra, the second national anthem of Mexico. And that's usually accompanied by a dance called zapateado. Hey, I nailed it first time.
I would say teado.
Oh, man. I actually surprised myself. I had that like Little Orphan Annie, like surprised look, and I still didn't get it right.
Come here, Sandy. Come here, girl.
Right. But that's like a heel stomping foot dance. That's pretty cool. If you just look that up.
That's what we were doing in kindergarten.
Okay. Gotcha. I got you. You're doing
It's still so embarrassing.
Zapateado.
I guess we called it the Mexican hat dance, which is probably wrong too.
I'm quite sure it was. It sounds, of those two, I'm pretty sure Mexican hat dance is the wronger in 1970s America of those.
That's right. I guess the last thing we should mention about the music itself, like the sound, is one of my favorite parts of this or any music, which is multiple voices singing together. I love choral music. I love 3, 4, 5-part harmonies. Mm-hmm. There probably is no such thing as 5-part harmony.
Why not?
I don't know. Is there a limit?
I don't think so. Only in your mind.
Oh, whoa. Hold on. But there are singers that have backing mariachi bands, but they're in a mariachi band. There's typically not what's called a lead singer. That someone may take a lead on the song, but it's usually a lot of people singing at once. Yeah.
It's like Chicago. Basically, everybody can sing, right? And they take turns.
That's right.
And
Robert Lamb.
You'll actually see, a guy stop playing his trumpet and move to the front and start singing on a new song. Like that's just kind of how laid back it is. One of the other cool things about mariachi too is if you watch the violinists. There'll be like 3 or 4 of them just standing there potentially, and they'll all start to bring their bow to their instrument at different times. It's not this precision timing, and because there's multiple instruments, one can come in like a half measure late or something like that, and it makes no difference whatsoever. You can't hear it in the first place, but it's just like it's not meant to be this intensely perfect and precise music, and that's actually seen in the way that it's passed along. Like you can now, as of I think the 60s, you can go to schools, sometimes public schools like elementary and middle and high schools, but there are some college curricula that teach you mariachi. But traditionally, it was passed down just by practicing. Like it wasn't written down. It was like, here's how you play Cielito Lindo, and you would pick that up, or else you'd go watch your favorite mariachi band in the town plaza and, basically be a groupie long enough that they'd let you start playing with them, that kind of thing.
That was Coco. Did you ever see Coco?
I did not, no.
One of the best movies, animated films. It's just fantastic. Definitely the best looking animated film I've ever seen.
Wow.
But that was the kid in Coco was like a little mariachi groupie would just like, and his parents didn't want him hanging around. Mm-hmm. Like all of this stuff is kind of spot on.
Yeah.
Really good movie though, and great music. But mariachi finally would make its way to the United States long before Coco in the 1940s in Los Angeles. Obviously, has always had a strong, proud Mexican-American community there.
Mm-hmm.
And then up through the 1960s, which during the Zoot Suit episode, we talked a lot about the Chicano movement in the 60s,
Mm-hmm.
where Mexican immigrant communities all of a sudden kind of stood up for themselves and organized. And it was very much akin to the Black Power movement. And they adopted a lot of mariachi songs as kind of part of their movement.
Yeah, and some they repurposed. There's a famous song called De Colores that talks about how beautiful the landscape is in spring. And they basically repurposed it to be more of a metaphor for how, the beauty of different people of color, Other ones were actually written. There's a song called El Picket Sign, which is hilarious.
So did you listen to it?
I did. And it's
a good song.
It doesn't sound very mariachi. It more sounds like a 1960s acoustic guitar protest song, which is exactly what it was. But it was, part of the United Farm Workers Union strike and the larger Chicano movement too.
A big respect box again was checked in the 80s when Linda Ronstadt came out with her album Canciones de Mi Padre, and this was a very big deal. I don't know if you remember this at the time, but Linda Ronstadt was a huge star,
mm-hmm.
and I can't recommend the documentary about her enough. It's called The Sound of My Voice. One of the great singers of all time in any genre is Linda Ronstadt, and she has Mexican heritage. And not many people know this because she's very fair-skinned. Her name is Ronstadt,
Right.
is German.
Yeah.
But that's why she made that album. And she did interviews at the time, and the documentary talks a lot about her Mexican heritage.
Mm-hmm.
And I think she's part German too. And there was, like you were talking about, the German influence in Mexico.
Right.
It was a big melting pot, and she was a part of that melting pot. I think her either father or grandfather was Mexican, and so she came out with this album, and it was huge. It went double platinum,
Mm-hmm.
and this was in the mid-late 1980s, and it gave a huge boost to the mariachi music.
Yeah, and she was playing with some legit mariachi bands. I think she hosted basically 3 of them on her album. She played with one of them, Mariachi Vargas, on Saturday Night Live. Yeah, I mean, it was a giant, enormous thing. I don't remember when it happened, but I can just imagine America being like, wait, what? And then listening to it and being like, oh, this is really good. But that also explains a longstanding mystery that I never understood before, which is why on the Mr. Plow episode of The Simpsons, when Barney is hanging out with Linda Ronstadt, she tries to adapt the Mr. Plow song into Spanish.
Really?
Yeah, or she's like,
oh, that's funny.
Señor Plow no es macho, solamente un borracho, which means
my God,
Mr.
that's
Plow
amazing.
is not manly, only a drunk. And it lasts 2-3 seconds, but I had no idea.
Oh, man.
I just thought it was so random.
God, don't you love that when a Simpsons joke hits, 20 years later?
Exactly 30 years, actually. That episode came out in 92.
That is crazy.
Yeah.
All right. Well, let's take another break. I'm going to go get my spray paint can lid.
That's
out.
really tough to say, isn't it?
It really is. I'd stumble. You say it.
Spray paint can lid.
Yeah. See,
I've been practicing in my head because I knew this moment would come.
I've been stumbling over it the whole time. So I'm going to keep practicing saying that, and we'll be right back. Spray paint can lid.
Very nice, everybody. Very nice.
All right. So now we are in the mid 20th century, and Mexican cinema is all of a sudden finding its way into theaters all over the world. And that means Mexican music is going to be introduced in more places all over the world, which includes mariachi. And depending on where you are in the world, it might have taken hold more than others. And I think this is a really cool thing when something from one disparate culture makes its way to another place. And for some, like Hasselhoff in Germany, all of a sudden that place really loves this thing. And that happened in Yugoslavia. One of the reasons is at the time, political leaders there didn't want a lot of Soviet music. They didn't want a lot of American music. And they saw this Mexican music as neutral politically. So it was a little more, not encouraged, I guess, but not shunned. And all of a sudden, there were some parallels being drawn between the revolutionary traditions in both of those countries. And even today, in places like Serbia and Croatia, there are mariachi bands that play.
Yeah, and this wasn't like a fringe thing. Like mariachi, from what I can tell, there's a really interesting Roads and Kingdoms article that Livia dug up that it basically says like mariachi was as big as any music in Yugoslavia in like I'm guessing 50s, 60s, and 70s is the impression that I had.
Have you ever heard Yugoslavian music?
I listened to a little bit. I listened to a little bit of the mariachi. That's the other thing, too. It doesn't matter if it's a Serb playing mariachi, a Japanese band playing mariachi, or, somebody from Texas playing mariachi. It is the same music. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, I think honoring that tradition, like no one wants to put a spin on something that is so much just what it is.
Yeah, certainly not
sense?
A disco spin. I looked.
There are Japanese mariachi, one called Mariachi Samurai, that's been around for 20 plus years. There is a confirmed mariachi band in China. As we will see there in the big festival happening this year, there is one from Sweden that's showing up. So it definitely took hold in different parts of the world in the 20th century.
Yeah, for sure. So, Chuck, I feel like we should talk about some notable mariachi.
Yeah, and we should also point out that when we say mariachi, that can be a band, that can be an adjective describing the music,
right,
or it can be, as in the case of the great Robert Rodriguez film El Mariachi, it can be a single individual is a mariachi.
I still never saw it. I've only seen Desperado. I've seen it like 50 times, but I never moved on to El Mariachi.
Move back. El Mariachi was the first one.
Sure.
And then Desperado was kind of a remake, but kind of not.
Like Evil Dead and Evil Dead 2.
Yeah, very much. In a lot of ways. You should check out El Mariachi. It's the one he made for like $8,000 or whatever.
I'll check it out. Don't pressure me.
It's good. Back off, bub. All right, go ahead, tough guy.
Fine.
Tell me some notable mariachi.
All right. One of the first actually was the Quarteto Coculense.
Okay. No, I think that's good.
There was a guy named Justo Villa, and he was the first mariachi to perform, or his quartet was, at the Mexican capital back in 1905. They were also the first ones to put this on wax as early as 1908. So these guys were holding it down. Because remember, mariachi, it had only been 50, 60 years old tops when it was first being started to be played, in the rural areas. So these guys were the first in Mexico City playing this stuff at the turn of the 20th century.
That's right. We could also mention Mariachi Vargas. This is a tough one. De Tecatitlan. Yeah?
Tecalititlan.
Say it again?
Tecalititlan.
Oh, okay. Is that right?
No, I added a T just to make it easier. I think you said it right the first time.
That's a tough one, but this was one of the more famous, maybe the most famous and longest running mariachi group ever. They were founded in 1898 and is still around today. Obviously, over the years, they just swapping people in and out, but it's still the same band under the same name, which is pretty cool. And they really kind of established the mariachi style from that region. And used that harp early on. Yeah.
So they've been playing since the 19th century. In the 30s, they made their way to Mexico City because, again, this is like now the epicenter of mariachi music. And I don't know how or exactly what they did, but they were named during that decade the official mariachi of the Mexico City Police Department.
I thought that was really funny.
It really is. Like, did they follow them around on like raids and stuff and like play some background music or...
That would be pretty great.
They also started to show up in movies, and they would play. They would back up a guy named Pedro Infante, who was like a pretty huge star during the Mexican Golden Age of the 30s to the 50s. And these movies were typically vehicles of his, and I'm guessing those were a lot of the ones that made their way to Yugoslavia.
Yeah, probably. Let's just pick out a couple of more of these because we could just list people all day long.
Sure.
Since we mentioned these guys earlier, we need to shout out Miguel Martinez and Jesus Cordoba, who
Yep.
were from the band Mariachi Mexico de Pepe Villa.
Mm-hmm.
And they were from the 1950s. And those are the two guys who worked out how to use two trumpets together. And it sounds like, oh, you just played the same thing at the same time and same melody, but that wasn't exactly what they did. They mixed it up, and I think they played in harmony. And all of a sudden, two trumpets were a thing.
Yeah. And there's another group, Mariachi Los Camperos, that was founded by Nadi Cano. And he really kind of like whipped this existing band into shape and got them into Carnegie Hall in 1964. They were the first mariachi group to perform there. They opened their own restaurant, La Fonda de los Camperos, in L.A., and that explains why Vicente Rodriguez is basically in a Mexican restaurant, or I guess just a restaurant in the two videos I've seen of his. So that became kind of like a thing. Like you would have your own like home base where you could perform every night of the week if you wanted to, and also probably attract more business. Plus you're making that restaurant money on the side too.
Yeah, and highly recommend if you go to Los Angeles, you want to do something fun one night. There are quite a few restaurants there that have not the roaming the tables mariachi, but the full like 12 to 14 symphonic on a stage performance scene.
Mm-hmm.
And it is a lot of fun to go to these places and get some great food and margaritas and listen to these performances. So look it up. It's online. I don't have any. The one I went to, I texted my friend, but he never answered, so I can't remember the name of it.
I'll tell you another place to get all that same experience is Epcot Center.
Are you talking about Mariachi Cobra?
Yeah, they've been the house Epcot Mexico Pavilion mariachi band since 1982.
Not a bad gig.
That's a pretty good streak. That's a 40-year streak.
Well, I love that they're just like, why hire, like, these guys are great, so let's just keep them on forever.
Yeah, exactly. And that band was like, Florida's pretty great. We're just going to move here.
If you notice, we keep talking about men, like many, many musical genres have we seen that we've covered throughout the years, except for disco, actually, notably, is that women have had a harder time getting a toe in the pool. And mariachi is no different. At the beginning, it was exclusively men, and they were playing in these sort of rough and tumble places where people were getting boozed up on cerveza, and it was not seen as an acceptable thing for women to do in the mid-19th century in Mexico. But as Livia is keen to point out, there always have been exceptions. Beginning in the early 1900s, there was a 13-year-old named Rosa Parks who had played with male mariachi bands, but eventually went on to lead her own group, and apparently used to carry a piece to protect herself on the road.
Yeah.
Because it was dangerous business.
I also saw that she would threaten hecklers and people who harassed her while she and her band were playing with it. She would say,
"Oh, really?
Gentlemen, we are working," and she would produce her gun and just let them see like she was not to be trifled with. She also wore like bandoleros like Pancho Villa.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, she sounds pretty
That sends a
cool
message.
for sure.
In the late 1940s, you started to see some bands that were all women, some mariachi groups in Mexico City. Eventually, they would make their way to Los Angeles. In the U.S., the first all-female mariachi group was Las Rancheritas, and this was in Alamo, Texas, in 1967. And I believe there is even now an all LGBTQ plus mariachi group with the very first transgender woman in the history of the genre, with Natalia Melendez.
Yeah, Mariachi Arcorias.
Yeah, I mean, things have come a long way.
Yeah, there's also another one worth mentioning, Flor de Toloache. They're from New York. I think they're a four-piece. They are really amazing too. But even still today, even with all of these like really great all-female mariachi bands, they still are just kind of viewed differently than the male performers are. There was a anthropologist in 2013 named Mary Lee Mulholland, and she basically just started studying the difference between male and female mariachi performers and found that the male performers are typically expected to represent like that kind of rural, rough and tumble, bawdy, humorous sometimes, like just macho kind of vibe. While the female performers were expected to like be sober and like dignified and pretty. Don't forget pretty. Had to be pretty too. And then they were judged on that. And I mean, I guess it's to be expected, but I get the impressions that the female performers were still just treated differently depending on where they performed. And they said, by and large, they tended to prefer performing at weddings and baptisms and that kind of stuff, rather than like at bars and like the public plazas where the male performers typically go.
Who wants to be heckled?
Nobody.
And objectified.
And have to flash your gun.
Yeah, exactly.
What else you got?
I think that's about it. I mean, the last section here is just where to hear some mariachi music, and I think you can hire them out in your town to play a party if you want. I bet you every big city and many small towns, if you look up on the interwebs, will have mariachi that you can hire. You can go to look up and see if there are Mexican restaurants that have that music you can go check out. There are festivals now, and certainly in Mexico and all over the world, where you can go hear lots of mariachi, or just dial some up on your favorite music service.
Yeah, you could do a lot worse than starting with Vicente Fernandez.
Is that your guy?
He is, definitely. He's a good gateway mariachi performer, I think, you know?
Yeah. Oh, by the way, shout out, since I mentioned women in disco, Rolling Stone magazine just came out with they're doing a bunch of top 200 lists. They came out with their top 200 dance songs of all time, and not just disco, just like club, anything. And Donna Summer was number one.
Oh, nice.
With I Feel Love, one of the greatest songs ever.
That is a good one. That is a great one. You're right. Well, since Chuck doesn't have anything else and I don't either, I think that means with everybody that it's time for listener mail.
Yeah, we're going to call this breaking news. It's fun when a stuff you should know mystery is eventually solved.
Holy cow.
And Australia woke up and started emailing us one after the other around midday Georgia time today, because the Somerton Man has been solved.
Yeah.
The Somerton Man mystery.
I'm like ambivalent about this. I don't know how I feel.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Did you want it to remain a mystery?
Yeah, I think I did, actually. I don't think there was any harm in it remaining a mystery forever, and I almost feel like this guy just kind of cheated.
All right, well, here we go. Long-time listener, first-time writer from Adelaide, Australia. I've got an excuse to write in. I thought you and your listeners might be interested in breaking news. After exhuming the body last year, Professor Derek Abbott, boo, a researcher at the University of Adelaide, has completed DNA matching. No, I get what you mean. He didn't do like just good detective work.
Oh.
Unless you want to discount DNA as good detective work.
I mean, there's that show called The New Detectives, and it's all about this kind of thing, but I don't know.
All right. So we like the old detectives.
Yeah. In this particular case, I got no problem with using DNA evidence to capture contemporary murderers. How about that?
Oh, right. Or to exculpate and exonerate.
Yeah. You sound like Jackie Childs all of a sudden.
I don't even know who that is. Oh, Jackie Childs from Seinfeld?
Yeah.
Yeah, I totally did. All right, Kramer. Somerton Man was Carl Webb, an engineer and instrument maker from Melbourne, who came to Adelaide seeking a reconnection with his estranged wife. The name of the Thai, T. Keen, was his brother-in-law. The Book of Persian Poetry is still a mystery, so you got that going for you.
Okay, that's good.
And thanks for the show. And that is from Rafe and many others, but Rafe was the first person we got to. So
yeah.
Or they got to us.
Yeah. Thanks a lot, Rafe, and everybody for sending that in. Yeah, who knows? Well, at least the Tamim Shud part is still a mystery, okay?
Yeah, that's right.
Well, if you want to get in touch with us like Rafe did and kind of bring us down, me at least, you can do that via email. Send it off to stuffpodcast@iheartradio.com.
Stuff You Should Know is a production of iHeartRadio. For more podcasts from iHeartRadio, visit the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows.